Hello everyone, welcome to our lunchtime webinar. So you're here joining us at the Recentre external lunchtime webinar. So the who's doing the slides?
I can.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying a little bit about the Recentre and then introduce our speaker today. So my name is Helen Trivedi. I'm a researcher at the Recentre. So the Recentre is focused on doing research and creating evidence that enables practitioners, policymakers and research community to understand and improve children's social care and education. And covering research in these sort of four main areas from the work that we do from the centre. And today we've got Carolyn Sparse joining us, and she's an assistant and Special Education Research Unit in the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences. She's also a clinical psychologist and family therapist. Her research and clinical work focuses on families experiencing poverty and social vulnerability, with a particular interest in child welfare and protection services and the role of relationships in shaping more inclusive and equitable forms of support. So I'm sure you're really thrilled to hear what Carolyn's going to be talking to us about today. So poverty is a multidimensional experience of deprivation over a variety of life domains, and this talk looks at family poverty and child welfare services by focusing on relationships. Instead of seeing poverty only as a lack of money, it highlights how poverty is shaped by relationships within families, in communities, and between families and child welfare services, and how poverty in turn affects those relationships. So over to Carolyn to continue and talk with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you also for the kind invite to give this seminar here today. I arrived on Sunday and I've been very, very warmly welcomed here in Rockford, and it's just a real honor to be able to present my work and that of my team to you here today, and to have an opportunity to exchange also about the ideas that we are trying to develop. So what I have planned for this lunch break, so to say, is that first I want to situate a little bit the situations of families in Belgium, looking at poverty statistics. I've divided my talk very much from the Belgian context, also because I think it might be or provide interesting to zoom in on the context wherein we develop our research, but also make many links, of course, to international literature on this matter. In the second part, I will zoom in and look at the relation between poverty and child welfare and protection services and the evidence we have there that is relevant for our research agenda to broaden these issues to relational poverty perspectives and poverty-aware practices in child welfare and protection. Then from there, I will outline our research agenda and zoom in on two specific ongoing research projects and give you a bit of an insight into the preliminary findings and methodologies that we are developing, to end with an invitation for dialogue and sharing of ideas amongst us here present in person, and of course also you online who are very welcome. Very thankful and grateful that you are so numerously present here today. So looking at family poverty in Belgium, we know that 18.3, so a little over 18% of the population are at risk of experiencing poverty and social deprivation. Those are numbers based on data of the EU Silk survey. It's still one of the biggest surveys conducted in Europe to try and measure risk of poverty and social deprivation, whereby poverty is measured using a very absolute income line, so to say, like a border that you can approximately under, and deprivation is defined as being not able to meet the demands of society to be able to participate fully in society as a person or as a family. Very specific to Belgium. I don't know how much you know about Belgium, but we have quite an interesting structure with a Dutch-speaking part in the north, a French-speaking part in the middle, and there is Brussels right in between, which is technically Dutch-speaking, but more French-speaking, has a whole different government, different structure. So it's quite complex. And it's relevant because it's related to big regional differences in the number of poverty, like the poverty numbers, where in the north part, in Flanders, it's way less. And in Brussels, where I also live, the Cape Town is located in Flanders, but I live in Brussels. And in Brussels, almost 1 in 3 children grow up poor. So the numbers are starkly different, and that is also very important for policymakers, of course. Looking then at some data from the family survey that has been conducted twice now in Belgium, last time in 2021. We did some, together with Laurelise Robbe from the Department of Social Sciences and Koen Hermans within our university, we looked at the families experiencing deprivation in this family survey, and we found that 4.5 to 6% of families are at risk for severe deprivation. So meeting, scoring negatively or badly, so to say, on all measures in the survey that are related to deprivation. So falling behind almost on every aspect of participation in society. We have another interesting statistic that I want to mention, and it's called the Poverty of Opportunity Index, the kansarmoede index in Dutch. And that is, it's a service called Kind en Gezin, so child and family. These are the nurses and the midwives that come to your bed right after you've given birth, and they introduce themselves there. And after your child has been born, you go there for regular consultations to follow up on how they're growing, how they're gaining weight, how they are developing, but also how everything's going, vaccinations, they're in charge of all of that. And once at the start of your trajectory, they also inquire about the opportunity situation within your family. And so they measure one's income level, educational level of the parents, housing situation, work status. Apart from that, also health status of the parents, and then a level of stimulation in the family, which makes this a multi-dimensional measure of poverty risk that we have numbers for. And using that measure, we see that 12% of children aged 0 to 3 are at risk of growing up poor. So the downside of this measure is that the measurement stops at 3. So it's like quite a snapshot in the development of children and families. These statistics say something. They help us situate the scale of the issue that we are looking at. But as Ruth Lister has pointed out, our fascination or our focus on trying to define poverty by developing measures for it has also very much narrowed the way that we understand and define poverty. And she puts it very bluntly by saying our focus on counting the poor has made us blind for the experience of counting for nothing as someone who is poor. And indeed, we know that far from a financial strain, financial deprivation, poverty is a multi-dimensional state of financial, social, cultural, and relational inequality that very importantly shapes every aspect of life. And this will also, I will return to that when looking at the relational perspectives. This figure on the slide is actually a figure from research that has been developed right here at University of Oxford by Rachel Bray in collaboration with ATD Fourth World, where they did a participatory study with people in poverty around the world. So this is very interesting because it's, if you could say from the outside, these are very different kinds of poverty, like poverty experienced here in the UK, poverty experienced in Belgium, in the Netherlands, or in South America, or in African, or on the African continent, but still participants were from all over the world, and they came with one shared definition and experience of what poverty meant to them. And this is a result of that study. It's truly fascinating, and I think it's very important as practitioners, as researchers, that this work has been carried out, that they say the core experience of poverty is one of disempowerment, of being less in a society that's constantly excluding you. And this experience of disempowerment is shaped through a daily experience of suffering that targets not only your mind, but also your body and your heart, alongside a daily struggle against the situation in which you're living in. And daily moments and attempts of resistance. And this resistance is also very central to the agenda that we're trying to develop, and also an idea put forward by Ruth Lister very explicitly, who was one of the first poverty scholars to really put resistance at the heart of her theory, saying every day, all of the time, people in poverty aim to resist the conditions that they are in. And it can be conscious resistance, unconscious, it can be adaptive or maladaptive, but it's always there. This core experience of disempowerment, of suffering and resistance, we know from a large body of research has far-reaching effects on children's development, on their physical and their mental health, and also that of their parents. It encroaches on parenting, which we know can also be much more difficult in the context of continuous poverty-related stress, and it influences and impacts family relations. So we have a large body of research in the field of pedagogy that attests to the very complex and often detrimental effects on poverty of child and family development. That leads also to the very difficult and the very important fact that Belgian children who grow up in poverty are 4 times more likely to encounter child welfare and protection services than their peers who do not grow up in poverty. I think this is also an international trend that has been noticed in Belgium. So the last research that has been done concluded that they are 4 times more likely to encounter child welfare and protection services. So nationally and also in international research, we see the same trend. We see that families in poverty are overrepresented within child welfare and protection services. And there is a lot of international debate on what is now coined child welfare inequalities, looking at like, is this social gradient? Is this related to need? Like poverty does so much damage in a family that child welfare and protection services need to intervene? Or is there also a small or maybe even a large aspect of bias in all of this that we need to unravel? Bias in the mobilization of child welfare and support services, in decision making throughout trajectories, in maybe measures that are taken within a family, in how trajectories are shaped together with families, how they are consulted or sometimes not consulted. And this is something that I really find is there's still a prevailing research gap for Flanders and Belgium specifically, because this bias versus need debate still needs much more unraveling to really get a grasp of what is happening within these trajectories. What has been done, we have, of course, a lot of research already on what happens in child welfare and protection services for children and families who live in situations of poverty. And some of the findings I wanted to highlight for you today, because they are directly influential for the research agenda that we are proposing, is that in the Belgian system, as I think also internationally is often the case, there is a strong focus on risk and on unsafety in parenting. And this focus has been enlarged by our government imposing on several welfare and protection agencies the need to work with the science of safety approach, which practitioners themselves in research tell us that it narrows their focus to issues of risk and safety, whereby poverty is often literally parked as a complicating factor, but they do not really address it. They also do not really address, and they find it very hard to address, like how is poverty, how is it interwoven with these issues of safety and unsafety? So they kind of, it's there, they know about it, but they kind of tend to park it because they don't feel like how the model allows them to engage with poverty in their daily practice. And the focus on risk and safety is also important because it's very much determines the dialogue that they have with families when they are working and constructing this model, for example, of science of safety together. Well, we also know, and these are also very, very beautiful studies conducted by colleagues at University of Ghent in Belgium, is that not only is there stark distrust stemming from previous negative experiences of families with child welfare and protection services, or stemming from the great fear that their children will be taken away, stemming from their own histories of involvement with child welfare and protection services. But also when they are working together, they have very contrasting goals, hopes, and welfare strategies. So these strategies that parents propose, things that they feel might help them, contrast very significantly with the strategies adhered to by practitioners. Or practitioners tend to focus on everyday parenting behavior, on increasing structure, on discussing disciplinary tactics with parents. Parents feel like much more are they in need of practical solutions, of also being able to discuss material difficulties, being referred to the right agencies, having help in navigating the very difficult welfare landscape. And these contrasts keep appearing over and over again in the way that trajectories unfold. What happens is there comes in existence something that has been coined a pedagogicalization of poverty. It's a hard word. I almost feel like Mary Poppins. I'm trying to pronounce it. This has been coined as, or what has been put forward in a very recent, very, very beautiful PhD carried out by a man who has also worked in the system himself for many, many years. Actually, his whole career. He did his PhD only after he was retired. Is that he unveiled that the pedagogicalization of poverty is actually, it serves as a hegemonic discourse in the Belgian welfare and protection service. So whereby the context of poverty is largely ignored or not taking into account in understanding the everyday difficulties that families face. So what is targeted is really the consequences of poverty, like parenting skills, relational difficulties between children and parents, without taking into account the social determinants of the suffering that is taking shape in the family. What has been also called by Morris here in the UK, poverty serves as the wallpaper of practice, meaning it is omnipresent. It's very often there. Families in poverty are overrepresented. The most difficult cases are often cases where there is a lot of societal suffering present, but practitioners are so used to it being there that they barely notice it anymore, or at least they do not engage with it very often. And this idea of the wallpaper of practice has been expanded by Jean de Koene, the man I just told you about, of his PhD, and his colleague Laura de Wankel, as an idea that it does not only serve as the wallpaper of practice, but also as the wallpaper of policy. Because what they found, and it's actually a beautiful study, is that practitioners, they don't always treat it as a wallpaper. They actually try to undertake many small actions to resist the hegemonic discourse. They try to help families out in very secretive ways, sometimes even slipping them money, just getting some stressors out of the way. But they're very hesitant, and they rarely ever talk with each other about it, because they will feel like the policy guidelines within the organization and at the financial level allow them to engage with families and address poverty in this way. And so the focus group that they conducted was actually the first space in which practitioners heard from each other that they did the same things. And it was the first time they dared discuss it amongst each other. Like, how does that feel? How often do you do that? Because they felt like the policy framework did not allow them to engage in these types of actions. So having this perspective of poverty as the wallpaper of policy is very important, because I think it's the first step to be able to also critically research and maybe critically inform practice in the future. Also, what happens when poverty is treated mostly as a wallpaper in policy making and in practices is that there exists a risk to reproduce social injustice and even deepen poverty through the provision of child welfare and protection involvements. And we have, there are a lot of interesting, beautiful studies that I have cited a systematic review by Guy Skinner and his colleagues who that shows that the way that practitioners discuss or disregard poverty or not take it into account actually worsens the situation of families and even worsens the deprivation that they experience, because it becomes very hard to find solutions for that. And this is a very interesting book by Leslie Paik, who has done research in the US context. It's slightly different than the European context because, well, there are US-specific, mostly life of welfare policies that play into the situations of families. But one idea that she lays out very beautifully, and I think is very relevant also here in Europe, is that when you want to consider the effect of child welfare involvement on a family situation, it's not enough to look at the child that is actually involved in the child welfare trajectory, the one that you're looking at. But she really maps how several children in a family, but also parents themselves and extended family members, aunts, uncles, and their previous experiences within the whole extended family and maybe even neighbors or the community all work together to influence the way parents navigate the maze of child welfare services or fail to navigate it. So it really broadens our perspective in thinking about the ways in which child welfare and protection services may support families or inversely sometimes also reproduce social injustice. Relational poverty perspectives fit really interestingly with this whole complex issue of the way that poverty is taken into account in child welfare services and can influence welfare encounters, and also welfare encounters in turn can shape a family's situation. Because these relational poverty perspectives, mostly from the corner of social sciences, draw our attention to the fact that people are poor due to relations, due to the structural buildup of society. Poverty itself is a relation, and it in turn impacts all and every relation in a family's daily life. And so they also draw our attention to what is beyond the financial core of poverty, the financial disadvantage. There is this daily relational reality of being poor, being disrespected in society, facing shame and stigma, facing discrimination, facing othering, being distanced from the discourses and in daily life, but also even on television, in the media. And it's actually framed as a constant attack on dignity and self-esteem, also into a lack of voice and a denial of human rights. And within the child welfare encounter, we see that there appears to be indeed a risk for misrecognition and a denial of rights also within child welfare trajectories that we are very interested to understand more in depth and to try and research more in depth. These relational poverty perspectives have been an impetus for poverty-aware approaches to social work, who have been growing rapidly in the past decade, social models of care, really trying to provide a framework for engaging with this social reality and also engaging with poverty in working with families. This work includes both this is a quote by Bell Hooks, I think summarizes it perfectly. These frameworks allow us to develop work that is both engaged in the projected struggle to end poverty. So these frameworks depart from the idea that what families need is both a recognition of their suffering and a redistribution of means. So as a practitioner, you're constantly engaged in both trying to understand and acknowledge suffering, value and support resistance on an individual level, while still advocating for family rights, but also policy change on a higher level. So that's the redistribution component in these frameworks, which makes that practice is focused on the struggle to end poverty, as well as on a personal level, on a day-to-day level, working with families at their kitchen table, the struggle to understand, or the focus to understand their suffering and their resistance. This I added to the quote that poverty produces in order to be able to really provide services that can be meaningful for families. These perspectives and these frameworks has also shaped a lot of emerging research, emerging relational analysis of family life and child welfare encounters in poverty, which is very interesting work. But what practitioners and also scholars notice over and over again is that the translation into everyday practice remains difficult. And one reason that is put forward is that it's still abstract. How do these frameworks translate to this daily practice at the kitchen table, working with a child that's running around, climbing on cabinets, and maybe a parent that's yelling or crying or just received a difficult letter and want to consult with you about that? How do you use these frameworks and translate them to everyday work with mothers, fathers, their children, and maybe the rest of the family? And this is where the idea of our research agenda kind of emerged as a family therapist myself. There is my interest goes out to how can we really make this less abstract? How can we make this less tangible? And what is it that we need to know and understand to make it less abstract? Because I don't think it suffices to try and translate the existing findings into more micro tactics or micro level frameworks. I think we still lack a lot of knowledge to effectively create these frameworks. And so here Elizabeth Seal proposes that these relational poverty perspectives are not a theory in themselves, as they are a framework to connect with other existing frameworks. And this is precisely what we're trying to do. How can we connect these relational frameworks to existing theories in pedagogy, in child and family studies, in family therapy, to really invoke new conceptual frameworks to try and understand the micro-relational reality of poverty within families, within communities, and within the encounter between families, communities, and the child's welfare and protection system. So this is a figure I proposed in a chapter that will come out any day now in a book by Elizabeth Fernandez and colleagues that was edited in a second version, Theoretical and Empirical Insights into Child Poverty. That book is called, in which we propose to try and really engage in in-depth exploration of the way that suffering and resistance take shape in the context of family relations, of community relations, and in the encounter between the system and families and communities. So it's all linked. And I want to show you two studies that are situated on different levels of this figure as the second part of my presentation. The first one is really on the level of family relations, and it's focused on resistance. And it's a study by Liliana Matatsova, my PhD student, who's also in the audience today. So thank you for being here, Liliana. And she engages, her PhD research is focused on trying to understand how parenting practices, parenting behavior, parenting attitudes may actually be a form of resistance against poverty. And it may be conscious, may be largely unconscious, it may be adaptive, or it may be maladaptive. And then it's also where it becomes very interesting, because our hypothesis is that a lot of the behaviors that practitioners might see as damaging, and that might actually be damaging, that I leave in the middle, that they can be a meaningful form of resisting the situation of poverty that the family is in, and that reframing parenting behavior from the lens of resistance as a meaningful form of trying to overcome daily difficulties experienced in poverty can enable a different type of dialogue also between practitioners and between families. And it can overcome the divide in goals and in strategies that practitioners and parents adhere to. So what Liliana is doing right now is that she is still here engaging in a qualitative reanalysis of the existing literature on parenting and poverty from this framework of resistance. And she is also very actively recruiting parents for a second and a third phase of observations and interviews, whereby the idea is to really engage in a grounded theory conceptualization of parenting as resistance. Which will hopefully also enable us to develop what we have called a typology of forms of resistance that can maybe also serve as something tangible for practitioners and policymakers to hold on to. A second study, that's one I'm conducting myself. It's also still ongoing, but we are right now finalizing analysis for this first study. It's focused on the clinical encounter between the welfare system and families. So it's really located at the arrow there. And it is a study that focuses on how poverty shapes everyday care encounters in a shared family care facility. So it's a facility in Leuven where young parents below the age of 25 and their children below the age of 6 are admitted for care if there is a pending out-of-home placement. So if there is a risk of out-of-home placement, these families can live there. It's a treatment period of over a year of treatment within the center. And then there's a mobile follow-up at home, which can also cover like over a year of support. So this is quite a lengthy intervention. And I studied it over the course of the past year in 2025. By the first half of the year, I spent 1 day there observing, engaging in participant observation, and really from an ethnographic point of view, trying to understand how these relational interactions take shape. Interviews and focus groups are right now still ongoing, so 2 and 1 done, but a lot of them still planned in the coming weeks. There are 5 families in this study who have agreed that we could follow their trajectories, and 9 team members for the whole team who has agreed to be part of this study. And when you look at the data on the way that poverty shapes these families and care trajectories, the first thing that is very apparent is that poverty is always there. Every time that I was present in the living room, in the shared kitchen, in the washing space, on walks, on team activities, there's always some way in which poverty is palpable, is mentioned, is remarked upon, in which the stress related to poverty seeps into encounters, lunch meetings, so it's always there in every abstract of notes, of observational notes, every transcript of observational notes I have, there is some mention of poverty for every day that I have been there. And then the qualitative analysis also gives or leaves room for an interpretation of different themes of the way it shapes the care relationship. And there are 4 themes that have been delineated in the data so far. And that is, first of all, stress and participation and the link between both. So we see that poverty really intensifies parenting stress. I think that's very much in line with the current literature. But that this stress directly links families' engagement with the care program. So this translates into missed sessions on days that stress is especially high, early departures from the center, and even withdrawal from treatment. The second theme that we delineated in the data is the relevance of differing norms and differing contextual sensitivities. And there we see that really differing norms around self-care, or the extent to which people are able to care for themselves, or things that they have learned in their history, life history, can create tensions or blind spots within the care trajectory. And I will zoom into some case examples just a bit later on to give you a palpable feeling of what this is about. But what we see here, and this I think is very interesting, that it's both present constraints as well as the history of growing up in poverty that a lot of these families carry with them, that continue to shape participation and engagement to this day. Thirdly, there is a theme that really delineates the importance of disclosure and attunement, the times and the data, the moments of observation wherein I observed that poverty could be openly acknowledged and discussed. You really see opportunities arise to connect, for connections between the team and the families, and also for collaborative problem solving. where the team and families really succeed in coming towards practical solutions for difficulties and really achieve more together than one of them would have been able to do alone. On the other hand, the inverse is also true. Moments wherein families feel shamed or they fear judgment and they close off and they do not disclose what is playing under the surface or what is influencing under the surface. We see that this really shapes silence and withdrawal, not only from the family, but also from the team. You see that a team also tends to withdraw entirely from the connection with the family. Lastly, there is a theme on family agency and resistance, where you see there are many instances in the data of families taking initiatives, raising awareness. One of the families, for example, raising awareness was located very much in the part of the study, where after I explained that she and her son's name would be pseudonymized. In the study, she really insisted that she didn't want that. She wanted her name and her son's name in the document and on the document because she felt that she was contributing to something very important for other families as well. Many families also trying very hard to pursue further education, to really use the care trajectory as a means to find a room to find their way out of the limiting and constraining context that they are in. And we see that when the team manages to strengthen and support these instances of empowerment, agency, and resistance, that something very important happens even beyond formal therapeutic work, because this is much more located in everyday interactions, in the kitchen, in the living room, than it is in therapy sessions. So this really happens on a very small scale, everyday basis. And also there I have a case to illustrate this. But the first case example is about this shame and how it can lead to withdrawal. I'm going to read it to you. During the study, the center located from a spacious setting in a small town to a central location in a mid-sized city. For one family living in persistent poverty, the move transformed an already fragile balance of care, mobility, and parenting stress into an almost impossible puzzle. The family consisted of a mother and her 2-year-old daughter who had lived in the center continuously since a few weeks before the child's birth, so almost over 2 years. The center's move meant the loss of free parking space for a family who relied on a car for complex travel between care institutions, multiple support services, foster families, and their relatives in their home village. Parking fees in the street in front of the new location presented a significant financial burden as the family permanently attended the center and had no resources to pay or rent a parking spot. Although the issue was openly discussed with the care team, who engaged in dialogue with the city to look for possible solutions, no quick answers emerged. Days turned into weeks while the pressure on the family steadily grew. They arrived later and later at the center and often left early, missed therapy sessions, and gradually withdrew from daytime activities. Alternative options such as cycling were considered but met with great resistance. Only later did it emerge that the mother, who grew up in profound intergenerational poverty, had never learned to ride a bike, and she did not feel comfortable transporting her child in this way. Interestingly, none of the care workers, most of whom cycled to work and were therefore sometimes jokingly referred to by families as hippies, seemed to realize that the mother's lack of cycling confidence was a significant barrier rooted in her life history. Dynamics of shame and unspoken distance between the family and the team kept this barrier unvoiced for a long time, putting further strain on the care trajectory. Ultimately, the unresolved parking problem contributed to an accelerated exit from the residential program and a shift to mobile support. Yet concerns about the family's well-being remain, and no clear solution for the practical barriers has been found to this day. I think this case reflects how poverty shapes care not only through material barriers, but also through relational dynamics. Even within a family and within a familiar and a fairly supportive context, dynamics of shame and withdrawal made it difficult for the family to voice hidden barriers, such as this mother's lack of cycling confidence. Despite the team's efforts and creativity, these unspoken dynamics gradually eroded the therapeutic relation and the family's participation. The case illustrates how poverty complicates care relationships in subtle ways, where silence, shame, and withdrawal can undermine openness and participation, even in long-standing trajectories. Then there is a second case fragment. Another mother with a 2.5-year-old child greeted me one morning by immediately asking me if I knew anything about televisions, as hers was broken. I had to disappoint her, as other team members. When the family therapist arrived, she suggested calling her husband, who knew a bit about TVs. Together, they went upstairs, calling the husband, and they returned shortly after. The TV was broken and needed extensive and expensive repair. The mother was stressed and sad. Tomorrow, her older daughter, who lives with a foster family, would visit, and they usually watched TV together, a cherished bonding moment. This was also the first TV she had been able to buy herself. The mother withdrew completely to the couch, not responding to attempts for connection from the team. She scrolled on her phone, quietly trying to figure out replacement costs and possible ways to resolve the problem. Meanwhile, however, the team started brainstorming and searching for practical solutions on her behalf. After a few hours, they were able to find a temporary replacement TV that would meet her immediate needs. Although not all his mother's worries were gone, she now had the certainty that she could share that meaningful moment with her eldest daughter and had time to plan for a more permanent solution. This case, in turn, illustrates how practical support and everyday challenges related to poverty can restore connection with and within families, build trust, and foster participation, showing, I believe, that therapeutic work often unfolds through collaborative, real-life problem solving. In conclusion, I think that the micro-relational analysis of poverty on the crossroad with child welfare and protection services enables a nuanced understanding of family relationships and parenting that can greatly contribute also to our understanding of how we can shape policy and practices in child welfare and protection services, because precisely parenting and family relations are this key site for intervention and often a key site for difference in care encounters. A relational analysis can make everyday injustice visible and also identify possibilities for shared resistance and repair of injustice in everyday care encounter. And I think it can provide an empirical grounding for understanding how poverty shapes daily relational interactions in families and in the care encounter that can in turn also help to shape relation-oriented process research on family care. This is a other chapter of work that I'm trying to develop, but I don't have enough time to tell you about that. But this is really the idea, is to translate these relational perspectives also into a relational process research agenda to better understand the effectiveness and the workings of child welfare and protection practices. And the idea is that this may allow us to advance social justice, to recognize injustice, and engage in resistance together with families and practitioners in everyday care. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and I really want to use the remainder of our time to engage in dialogue and discussion with all of you, and I'm very happy to welcome any question that you might have.
Thank you very much. Yes, so please open to questions. If you're online, you are welcome to pop your question in the chat. Or we can invite you to unmute your microphone as well, and you can join in full dialogue in that way if you'd like to. And yeah, if you're in the room, you can just wave at me if you've got a question. So I mean, I'm happy to kind of put a first question out there. Don't have eyes in the back of my head. So I suppose, thank you for a really interesting talk first. It's really key, I think, to remember that context, the societal context that families are in, as well as, you know, they have parenting skills. Do they know about the roles they have, about family roles, but also like what else is going on around that influences that? So I'm wondering, what would be the main next kind of research focus or theoretical kind of developments that you're maybe looking to to go into?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I'm incredibly privileged to be able to still be able to shape a research line from scratch, and I think it's really oriented towards engaging in this in-depth understanding of what poverty does to everyday, day-to-day family relations and interactions. That is really one area of research that I hope to develop more broadly, starting from Liliana's PhD, but continuing hopefully also beyond that. And then the second big line I identify is that not only do I want to or do I think we need to understand how everyday care encounters work, but we need to, as I hinted to in my last slide, I think we can also extend it to a process analysis of interventions to really try and find out how this societal variables and this reality of poverty shapes like outcomes and processes of interventions that we're trying to develop throughout time.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you. Vanya. Yes.
Thank you for the really interesting talk. I'm delighted to have learned so much from you. Thank you. Question. So I'm interested in this setting, this kind of intervention with the families, because I'm not aware that happened in a kind of format like this in Portugal. In England also. There is the concept of a baby and a mother,
Yes.
but it's not like a family. What is the rate? I know you are aware of rate of success and prevention of entering a child being removed. I don't know if any studies have been done in that.
No, I'm doing the first one, so it's not entirely true. There have been like descriptions of the intervention carried out also by our colleagues in Ghent, but it started only in 2021. So the idea was conceived in 2020 based on an existing program in the Netherlands, where they really have a very intensive, form of trauma therapy, actually, where families are taken on site for 8 weeks and provided with very intensive trauma therapy. That idea was seen by our government, deemed interesting, and they tried to import it by making available means for already existing centers. They called Centrum voor Integrale Gezinszorg, so that would translate as a Center for Integral Family Care. We already had these. Which there are 8 of those in the whole of Belgium, and they have like space for 5 families living in and being supported. But it's more like what you would call there has been developed a typology in the US, and there you would call it like everyday family residential support. So they live in, they are supported with everyday care. There's a lot of emphasis on stimulating, for example, sensitivity and mentalization through like daily caring together. And it was two of these centers actually that received some extra means to incorporate also a trauma therapeutic module into their workings. But the way they've done it is very different from what is happening in the Netherlands, because what they have done is that they have kept this structure of a residential space in which you care and live together, and added on, they hired 2 full-time therapists that are also on site, and they have 3 weekly sessions depending on where the family is at and their headspace, and so it's not very rigid. But they have 1 family therapy session, 1 individual therapy session, and 1 mother or father or parent and baby session a week. So this is the program that they're developed, and research is very much ongoing. So they have noted down some of the things that they notice, but systematic research is only now unfolding, and we're actually in the process of co-creating a funding proposal that we are to submit in September. So to really engage in monitoring the processes and relational processes as they unfold throughout the intervention.
Mariana.
Thank you so much. Fascinating talk. I'm really interested in your conceptual approaches, and particularly the relational one, but also sort of cultural one. How do these people make sense of their poverty? if there is a culture or philosophical lens which they have to help them navigate their situation. I don't know whether you have any insights, and if I may make a suggestion, the work of Kimberly Brownlee, who has written recently about the human rights against social deprivation. So it's again about this aspect from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Thank you for the suggestion. I will certainly look it up. I think it's certainly implied. I was actually brought up as a transcultural scholar, so I think all of these ideas in some way also inform the conceptual frameworks that I hope or try to imply. Of course, being very careful to suggest that there might be something as a culture of poverty, but that of course that the idea that what people are trying to do is indeed making sense of a very specific context, and a very specific context of being in a minority, also being or facing a lot of discrimination and human rights violations in everyday society. And I think human rights frameworks are especially interesting. There is also in Belgium, there is a group working on children's rights and poverty. So that's certainly very interesting perspectives to engage with, and family rights, of course. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ian, thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And frighteningly, like much of the rest of the world, I was thinking, given the sort of persistent poverty exists, but also the demonisation of people in poverty, which certainly the discourse throughout my life at various points seems to be come back strongly. And I wonder what sort of policy implications does your work have? And secondly, do you think the policymakers in Belgium or in Brussels will be open to listening?
Yeah. I'm very hopeful that they're open to listen, because when I was preparing for this research agenda, and also for the position I applied for with this research agenda as a kind of a key or an entry class, I spoke with the director of the Agentschap Opgroeien, so the department Growing Up, who is that's the department that's responsible for everything that has to do with child welfare and protection services, and they actually have put poverty as one of their core priorities for over the coming years. I think we're in a very good position there, but there is certainly some kind of movement or interest at the moment to really try to unravel the relationship of poverty and child welfare, and how to do to work with it, and also to understand how it's currently taking shape. The PhD that I discussed on the pedagogicalization of poverty also departed from a question supported by the department. So there is certainly an openness. And I think what then could follow from this line of research is, I think it can really support concrete practice guidelines like for practitioners, but it can also inform, as I discussed in my talk, the level of openness or the nature of the framework that policymakers could support to enable practitioners to engage with poverty. Because it also means, of course, thinking critically about your caseloads, about the way they're able to get supervision, about the way they're able to obtain support. And that is something that might prove a bit more complex, because in Belgium, much like in every other country, caseloads tend to increase, waiting lines are increasing, and times to spend with one family is also decreasing. So that is that might be complex, but there is certainly an openness to the topic in general that I think we can meaningfully engage with.
Are there any questions online? I can't see any questions in the chat, and I don't. Just want to check if anyone's raised their hand. Well, thank you very much. Caroline, that was really, really great, and thank you for kicking off our 2026
Oh, wow. Okay.
seminar series. Yes, so we do have another seminar next month. That'll be in February. So we will be able to circulate the date and the topic, and that would be with Sarah Gorin, who is a new researcher who's joined the Research Centre. We'll talk about some of the work that she's been doing and will be doing. So thank you everyone for joining online. Thank you everyone here in person, and have a really good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.